So, John chapter 8, if any of you did read it, the first part of it is really easy to read. The second part less so, but we'll look at that a bit later. What do we think of when we think of light? You can shout these out. It's a very straightforward question. What do you guys think of over there? Jamie, what do you think when you think of light? Jamie, tell me you think of nothing when you think of light. I know you've got your brain. A torch. Yeah, brilliant. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I can see my way.
See your way. A saber. Good one. I hadn't thought of that one. No, I thought of candle, light bulb, torch, sun, daylight. Lighting up a dark room. I think probably all of us are slightly more aware of lighting up dark rooms in this current climate because we're remembering to switch the light off when we go out to save on electricity. Or we're trying to.
Can I add an odd one?
Pardon?
Can I add an odd one?
Yes, trust you, yes.
Not heavy.
Oh, very good.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't fit quite so well in the Jesus saying, I am the light of the world, I am the not heavy of the world. But no, you're right. Didn't think of that either. Illuminations. Great. So we know what we think about when we think about light. But what about the people that Jesus was talking to when he said he was the light of the world? What would they think when they thought about when he said that phrase? Because for the Jews, and he was speaking to the Jews because he was in the temple in this story, for the Jews, light was the first thing that they understood that God created. Their understanding of creation was that God created light first. There was darkness, there was a void. God said, let there be light, and there was light. They also would remember light as being the pillar of light that went before them on their way through the desert towards the promised land. During the day there was a pillar of cloud, at night there was a pillar of light, and that was always in front of them. Sometimes the cloud was behind them, but the pillar of light was always in front. And there are psalms that talk of light. Psalm 27, verse 1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? And Israel, this would be one of the key ones, Israel was proclaimed to be the light to the nations. And they knew, the Jews would have known that they were supposed to be the light to the nations. Isaiah 60 says, arise, shine, your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. But there were also prophecies that talked about the Messiah, the light of the Messiah coming. So the word light for them spoke to them about God, it spoke to them about hope, it spoke to them about hope for the future in this messianic figure. And it spoke to them about their responsibility as God's people. Isaiah 9:2 says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. I am the light of the world, Jesus is saying. It's one of his very well-known sayings. And he says it in 2 different chapters. And originally I was going to look at both. And then when I started to dig into chapter 8, I just realised there was so much in chapter 8 you couldn't possibly be thinking of 9 as well. But in that, you can picture this incredibly rich context that these words that Jesus said would have landed in. I am the light of the world. All these meanings that they would have been thinking of when he said that. Problem is, isn't it, that depending on what people think of the person who is saying the words, that decides on how they're going to respond. And so that's what we're going to see in this story. So John's Gospel, Kevin spoke from it last week. It's a strange Gospel. If any of you have ever tried to read it at a first attempt at reading the Bible, it's not an easy book to read. It's a beautiful book if you can get past a lot of the difficulties of it, but it's a hard book to read because there's a lot of conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees, and that's what we're going to see this morning. But one of the central points of John's Gospel is that the world didn't recognize who Jesus was because they prefer darkness. I love the way Andy's prayers completely just led into this message. You cannot read the Gospel of John without realizing how much emphasis he puts on Jesus being the light. Chapter 1 throws us straight into that. In the beginning was the Word. This is from the Common English Bible. And the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through the Word, and without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and the life was the light for all the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. I loved what Ben shared at his talk about the help that your father gave with that expression, the underlying ordering principle of the universe. If you substitute that phrase for the word, it makes it very wordy, but it really helps you understand that how much meaning is in that word, Jesus as the Word, the underlying ordering principle of the universe. I thought that was really good. So what about chapter 8? Like I said, there's a lot in it which we won't go into. Those of you that want to go to Jules's home group, that's where we can talk about some of these things in a bit more depth. But we need to, again, put that into context. It's 8 chapters. It's the 8th chapter in the book, so lots happened before that. There's been some different sort of miracles. Cana, the miracle of the wedding at Cana, happens in John. Chapter 5 starts to build on the animosity of the Pharisees towards Jesus. It's building up dramatically. Phrases like Jesus saying to them, I know you and you don't have God's love in you. Jesus is pretty harsh to the Pharisees. Kevin took us through chapter 6 last week, looking at the bread of life, looking at Jesus, I am the bread of life, and the challenge about that sign of the bread, that sign of that looks to the past, strengthens the present, and looks forward to the future. Chapter 7 builds even more tension. His teaching astounds the religious leaders because they don't recognize who he is and they cannot see where his wisdom is coming from. They accuse him of having a demon. That's a pretty big thing to accuse someone of, especially when they're the Son of God. Of course, they didn't know that. But they accuse him of having a demon. They're really annoyed because he's healed on the Sabbath. And all the time, Jesus is trying to show them who he is and who he has come from. But for them, the light is too bright, and they can't handle it. So they try to put it out. And in chapter 8, he's in the temple preaching. And that's their territory. Uh-oh. And everyone is gathered around him. But actually, if any of you have got your Bibles open, you will see that there's a little half sentence at the beginning of chapter 8 that is actually very important. It's actually the second part of a sentence that is the end of chapter 7. You have to remember that the chapter numbers and the verse numbers were not put in by the people who originally wrote the Bible. They were put in several hundred years later. And sometimes they didn't always make sense. There's a little half sentence that says, well, at the end of the last chapter, it says, all of them, and it's talking about the religious leaders, went to their own homes, and then the first part of chapter 8 says, and Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Why does Jesus go to the Mount of Olives? He needs to spend time with his Father. He needs to go to his power source. Light needs power source. So he goes to be recharged. And replenished and recharged, he comes to the temple. And he's going to need that recharging for these 2 chapters because the Pharisees have really got it in for him. Because he's in the temple and he's teaching, and what it says is that suddenly the Pharisees and the legal experts come in bringing a woman caught in adultery. I don't imagine that's quite as tame a scene as it seems to imply in the words here. They brought a woman caught in adultery. I don't imagine she came quietly. The word used to bring can mean to lead someone in a very gentle sense, but it's also the same word used to lead an animal, and it's also the word used when the riotous crowd led Jesus to Pilate. So we can take our pick of what this scene might look like. Personally, I'm pretty sure she didn't come quietly. I certainly wouldn't have done. Singled out as the sole culprit in an act that takes 2 people, I doubt she came quietly. I imagine she probably knew the law. It was very well known that both people caught in adultery were to be punished, so I doubt she was a willing, passive prisoner. The religious leaders are doing this as a deliberate attempt to test Jesus and to show him up in front of the people. It's in the temple, right in the heart of Judaism. And they quote the Jewish law at him. This woman was committing adultery. The law says we are to stone women like her. So what does Jesus do? Many of you know the story. It's a little bit bizarre for those that don't. It's not a practice that we do. He turns away from the religious leaders and he just bends over and he starts drawing in the sand with his finger or with a stick. It's really weird. Why would he do that? It's not a practice that we do, is it? I mean, if someone was talking to me and I suddenly turned around and started drawing a picture on the floor, you'd think I'd absolutely lost it, wouldn't you? Basically, he is ignoring them very deliberately and in front of everyone. It is actually a practice that was legitimate in those days in the Mediterranean world. And it basically is saying, I'm refusing to engage with that question. So he turns away from them and he draws in the sand. But they keep on. They keep on at him, keep pestering him. Come on, we've got to do something about this woman, don't we? That's what the law says. I find this a really chilling story for lots of reasons, but especially, obviously, for the poor woman. But also there's a horrible fake politeness in these religious leaders. Teacher, they say. Teacher. Trying to be really respectful and really, oh, we think you're amazing. But actually they're just trying to back him up. Trying to humiliate him. After Jesus has finished writing on the ground, and we don't know what he wrote, and it doesn't matter what he wrote, he stands up and he says, whoever has sinned should throw the first stone. Ow. Oops. I wonder how that made them feel. And then he turns away again, and he bends down, and he carries on writing. And this second act of writing shows exactly what I said. He is done with this conversation. He's not going to carry on this conversation. He's done. And one by one, they all leave. Imagine with their tails between their legs. Doesn't seem they go very far because they are in the next scene. But they leave the centre of this story. And I bet some of them are embarrassed. I bet some of them are livid. And in the middle of this crowd, Jesus is left standing there with a woman on her own, and her captors are gone. And he asks her, where are they? Is there no one left to condemn you? I just love that sentence. It just sort of clears the space so that he can speak to her heart. Is there no one left to condemn you? And her reply is important. She says, no one, Lord. And that word, Lord, is Kyrie, which many of us will know the Greek Kyrie eleison. Excuse my Greek there. Perhaps she recognises who he is. And it's when we recognise who Jesus is that we're able to respond to him and recognise who we are. And Jesus says to her, neither do I don't condemn you. Off you go and don't sin anymore. Let's not miss the incredible significance of those words. She would have been expecting condemnation because what she'd been doing was wrong. Isn't that the case for all of us? We expect Jesus to condemn us. But all he wants is for us to recognise who he is. And in the next verse, he tells us who he is. And that's where we get the phrase, Jesus said to them in verse 12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Light exposes the darkness. The Pharisees were trying to expose Jesus and the woman's sin, but in the end, it was the darkness of their hearts that got exposed for everyone to see. So Jesus, as the light, exposes, but how does he expose? Who are his judgments against mostly? It seems, at least in the Gospel of John, and certainly in the first few chapters, that it's mostly against the religious leaders that his judgments are. So a little aside here, if you do read the Gospel of John and you're new to the Bible, you will hear a lot about Jesus judging, and it's hard to read. We must never forget that, yes, Jesus does judge. He does have the right to judge. He was sinless. He was the only human being ever that never committed a sin. But it's not just that. Yes, he might judge. He shone the light on all that was evil, but then what did he do? He took the punishment for that evil himself. He didn't expect other people to. He wasn't standing at a distance judging. He was judging, saying, and then saying, I'm taking your punishment. And how cool is that? The judgment that Jesus demonstrated cost him his life. the darkness, the smallest light can be seen. Light is the opposite of darkness, and however small, it is stronger. Let's never forget that. However dark the world may seem, and I know Andy touched on this, the light of Jesus is stronger, even a flickering candle. If you've read through these chapters before today, this chapter 8 especially, the second part of it, you may have a lot of questions, as I've said, about some of the things that Jesus says, because it is tough, and it's good for us to dig into, but not today. But suffice to say, the challenging and hard things that Jesus says in the rest of this chapter need to be seen in context. This is not a polite conversation that's been going around a meal table, or a nice British posh sort of conversation of disagreement. This is a riot developing. The end of this chapter ends up with the religious leaders wanting to stone Jesus. So we're talking about a massive incitement of anger from these religious leaders. So if Jesus does seem to say harsh things to them, it's fairly justified. There is emotion and there is feeling and anger in the words that they say. But there's also emotion and anger in Jesus. Because he is angry. He is so angry with them. And we mustn't soften him into a gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He was so angry because they could not see what God was doing. And they were going to miss out on the future joy and glory. And it's tragic. And he was heartbroken about this. He had every right to be angry because they should have known better. They knew the scriptures, but because what they saw did not look like what they expected, they couldn't see it. And they totally missed out. The light exposes the darkness. The light exposes what is going on. So we've got the Pharisees and we've got the woman. So the question I've been asking myself as I've been studying this is, how do I respond when the light exposes my heart? Do I respond like the Pharisee or the woman? How do I handle criticism? Do I put my shutters up, or do I allow God to use it to shine the light in what I need to change? You know what it's like when someone turns the light on in a dark room and you're not ready for it? At first you have to shut your eyes because it's almost painful. But then your eyes adjust and you can see and you appreciate what you see around you. Or not. Sometimes what you see is ugly and scary and you might shut your eyes again. Those of you who know me well, I'm going to tell this little story, know that I have a phobia about spiders. And before any of you come and offer to pray for me to break it off, trust me, I have done that for years. And for some reason, God has not done anything about it. He does teach me a lot through it though, so I think it's a little bit like Paul's thorn in the flesh. I was away a couple of weeks ago on a little retreat, staying on my own in a big house. And the one thing I said to God, I really don't want there to be a big spider. It's September. We all know in this country spiders come into the house in September. Last night, I walk into the bedroom, there's a massive spider on the ceiling. Thanks, God. So what are you going to teach me through this one? And it took me about half an hour to try and get rid of it. And in the end, it disappeared behind a wardrobe. And I couldn't find it. And I thought, well, I've either got to sleep or I've got to go to another room or something. It's someone else's house. I didn't want to go and make any other bed sheets dirty. So I ended up trying to sleep. Couldn't sleep. Went downstairs. But in the process of getting out of bed, I was trying to find my glasses. And I knocked the light, and it was one of those touch-sensitive lights that suddenly came on. I was like, no, I don't want to see what's in this room in case the spiders come out from behind the wardrobe. So I quickly switched off again. And made sure when I went back in, I went nowhere near that light and got back into bed. I actually slept very well in the end. And the spider never reappeared. He was probably quaking in the corner. It's a funny story, but isn't that the truth? Sometimes the light shines on something and we do not want to look at that thing because it's too ugly. Scary. I wish I could say I take criticism well. Kevin and I were in a board meeting many years ago in America, in an organisation that we've worked for, and the director of the organisation, very unjustly accused me of some things, and I was so upset and very angry. And one of our really good friends, who was also on the board, said to me, if people criticise you, and if you think it's a false accusation, have a listen. Think about what you need to take from it. Is there anything you need to change? Let it shine a light on your heart. And then if it's not, discard it. Wise advice. Because unfortunately for me, anger and sadness is always my first response. And then God shines a light and says, right, this is what I want you to deal with. And I need to deal with that, and I need to get rid of what is unjust. How do we respond when God shines the light onto us? Jesus shone the light onto the Pharisees brightly, but that is because they were leading people away from God into rules and regulations. And as leaders, as I said before, they should have recognised who he was. And when the light exposes the darkness, it depends on our relationship to the darkness as to how we respond. If we're quite comfortable in the dark, then the light is uncomfortable and too bright. If we don't like the dark, then we welcome the light, whether the darkness is in us or around us. But if we prefer the darkness, we don't like the light. Sometimes we don't want the darkness exposed, and sometimes we don't want to see like that spider story. But the same organisation that we worked for, our job in that organisation, we've been asked to go there to take the ceiling off the organisation so that it could expand into the country that it was working in. But actually what ended up happening, taking the ceiling off, exposed all the stuff that needed to be changed within the organisation. So what is our relationship to the light? Is the light behind us, or is it in front of us? Because when the light is behind us, everything is distorted. When Kevin and I walk up from the village, we come up the alley over there in the dark after an evening, and one of us will hold our pen as a torch, usually Kevin. And the first time he'll try it from behind, and I'm trying to walk, and all I can see is my shadow, and I'm tripping over things. He has to stand in front of me with the light, so that I can follow the light. But also, if we have the light behind us, we can look pretty intimidating to other people as well. And have you ever stood, some of you will have seen this analogy before, but I just love it, so I wanted to use it again. Have you ever stood with the light behind you to look at a stained glass window? Nothing special about that. But when you look at it towards the light, look at the difference. We need to have our faces turned towards the light. We need to have our faces turned towards Jesus. But sometimes we can't see the light because the lenses we're looking through are too dark. The Pharisees couldn't see who Jesus was because they were too focused on maintaining the rules and regulations, so all they could do was find fault with him. I keep having to come to God in repentance because I've missed what he is doing, because I'm too caught up on my own stuff or being too critical. And I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again because I find it really challenging. It happened to me, and I still have to learn from it. America again, we were staying with our parents, my parents, and we used to go to their church. They had a little sort of group of people that, a very relaxed church, a bit like a brethren church, where anyone could sort of bring anything, bring a song or whatever. And there was a lady in that church who had significant learning disabilities. And every single week she would get up and she would say something. But she was really hard to understand. So I always got very frustrated. And every single week she would ask if we could sing a hymn. And it was always either Trust and Obey or Just As I Am. Two very old hymns. And I can remember, we've probably all done this, it's called Dining on the Pastor. Sitting at home after church service, critiquing the service. And I can remember doing that with my parents. And, we were talking about how frustrating this was. And then the next day I went into work and I chatted with a colleague who also went to that church. And she said, wow, she says, I actually look at it like this. I say to God, what are you trying to say to me this week? Is this a week where I need to trust and obey you? Or is this a week when I have to just come to you just as I am? And I just thought, what a difference looking towards the light. If our glasses are too dark with our own criticisms, we will not see what God is doing. Do we need new glasses? Light in the darkness. Again, Andy talked about this. The world does feel dark at the moment. A lot of conversations this week as people talk about how they're feeling, and just sense of uncertainty. There's so many issues, wars and famines and refugee issues and cost of living and political mayhem and climate change, heating bills, all of it. Talking to teachers, children are struggling. Children are uncertain how to behave anymore. I don't know if it's end times or not. To be honest, I don't tend to engage with end times conversations because I don't personally think it helps. I'm not saying it's wrong to, I just don't personally find it helpful. Because for me, I think it shifts my focus and generates fear. But the fact of the matter is we live in a world that needs Jesus. So however long we've got here, we need to have that as our focus. But, as we've been reminded, however dark the darkness is, the light will shine. If the only way to light your way through a dark alley is to light a match, it will do the job. Light is always stronger than darkness. However small the light, it will shine in the darkness. But Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And in chapter 9, he said, as long as I am in the light of the world, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And then many of us know in Matthew, Jesus says to his followers, you are the light of the world. So the same applies. While we are in the world, we are the light of the world. We are the light of the world. That's important to remember. If we love and follow Jesus, we are the light of the world. But how we are the light is important. How we respond to the light of Jesus will shape how we are the light. Our humility in allowing Jesus to shine a light into our hearts, or to shine a light onto things around us, showing what he is doing in the world, our humility and our response is important. And the direction we are towards the light will shape how we show the light to the world. If we aren't looking at Jesus and the light is behind us, all it's going to do is cast a shadow. I was at a conference many years ago, and the person running the conference, some of you might have met her, Bev Laurel, she used to head up Skylark. She wrote something at the start of journals she gave to everyone. I'm just going to read a little bit. Some of you from Aspire have heard this already. Empowerment comes through looking up. When a shadow is cast, it means the light is behind you. There will always be shadows, but strength comes from looking at the light, not the shadow, even if it means you have to close your eyes sometimes. She told me after the conference, she had me in mind when she wrote that. I felt really challenged. If things are clouding our vision, whether it's criticism, pain, shame, that is going to affect how we see Jesus, and therefore it's going to affect how we reflect him to the world. Sorry, I always get behind on my slides. I'm just going to go through the questions again. How do we respond when the light exposes us or what is around us? What is our relationship to the light? Are we looking towards Jesus, or do we have our backs to him? Do we need new glasses? And remember, light in the darkness, we are the light of the world if we follow Jesus. But the last one is actually the first one that I started with, and I only touched on it. It's an important one to end with. Where do we go when the going gets tough? Do we go to God? Do we get our strength and our energy recharging from him? Remember, however dark the world may seem, the light of Jesus is stronger, even a flickering candle. If that's all we feel we are, that is still stronger than the darkness. But when we're a flickering candle, the darkness can look very, very dark. So we need to know where our source of power comes from and to keep going back to it. I know we've gone a little longer, a bit like we used to, but more recently we've had shorter services. I do want just to spend a couple of minutes with, there's a song there, Mike, The Radiance of Jesus. Just playing this song without words, just having a thought, just thinking about these questions. Are there any that we want to really take home with us? Are there any that we really want to respond to and think through? What is God saying to us? Is God really speaking to us? Isaiah 42:3 says, he's not going to extinguish the faint wick. So if you do feel like you're a flickering candle in the darkness, Jesus won't extinguish you. But perhaps you need to be spending more time at the power source. Let's just pray that.